So the pandemic is definitely winding down, but Americans are not necessarily celebrating. So the American Psychiatric Association published reports late last year, which surveyed Americans' outlook for 2023, and they found nearly 2 out of 5 people were rating their mental health as only fair or poor. When asked about possible topics and sources of anxiety, nearly all categories reported on had increased. And that's everything from finances to physical health, mental health, concern about relationships, romantic relationships, and really everything except for travel. This guy is still, as you can see, quite concerned about travel. But this report was from the end of 2022. At that point, the numbers for COVID have been going down. People's concerns, the climate, and we're back to going to the movies and we're back to doing things as a society. But despite that, high levels of angst still happening. So the higher incidence and exacerbation of social anxiety due to the pandemic underscores the need for psychological interventions that can address problematic social anxiety in the post-COVID-19 recovery period. Moreover, social anxiety commonly co-occurs with depression and other conditions such as anxiety disorders and substance abuse. So that's pretty intuitive, right? If a person's anxious and it's interfering with their quality of life, that depression can ensue, and then the person may be looking for panaceas and way to relieve themselves. They could have their own sense of compounded problems, like we just saw with the substance abuse. However, there have been other more biological effects discovered among some people during the COVID-19 pandemic, and these include structural changes to the brain of adolescents. This is not in relation to patients that had contracted COVID-19. This is just saying the effects of the quarantine and the stress that we all went through. Findings from a study involving adolescents and MRI brain scans that had been done showed associations between not just the COVID-19 pandemic and impaired mental health, but also maladaptive and abnormal brain development. This insightful research was just published from 2022. There we go. I mean, when I just came across this a few months back, that's one of the things that prompted me to put this presentation together. The information is very current, and of course we all experienced some level of anxiety and the strain, right, of all the changes that were happening around us. But this is one of the first things that came forward and said that there's actual biological and physiological effects that were associated with those experiences that we all globally went through. What they had done was compare the MRIs before the pandemic and before any of the quarantine, and then once those things were in place. So the study utilized brain MRIs and took measurements on things like the cortical thickness and volume of the subcortical areas. These results were further used with a machine that looked at calculating a person's overall brain age. The two groups differed significantly in both their mental health and brain development. Compared to the pre-pandemic group, adolescents assessed after the pandemic shutdowns reported more symptoms of anxiety and depression. Just a little picture here showing how the brain, the cortical region is that outer surface area, and there's considered to be different lobes that get named based on the parts of the skull. But their brains showed thinning of the cortex and reduced volume in the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are involved in assessing memories and regulating responses to fear and stress, respectively. So when these changes were reviewed for biological brain aging, then the post-shutdown group had morphological changes consistent with the brains of older people whom had experienced chronic stress and adversity.